Welcome everybody online. We're back with another exciting panel for today. And I'm not sure if there's a theme for it. If there's any theme, it's going to be generative AI, as is what we are here for. We have 4 esteemed panelists, and I think we will start off with a little round of introductions. Please introduce yourselves, starting with Luka.
Hi everybody, my name is Luka Crnkovic-Friis. I'm the head of AI.
Yeah, just one sec to see if they can test. Yeah, you don't have one of those. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. Had it been an actual emergency? It's coming. 1, 2. Yeah. Go with this one.
Right. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Luka Crnkovic-Friis, and I'm the head of AI and ML at King. Before that, I was the founder and CEO of Plutarion, a Swedish company that worked with democratizing machine learning. And yeah, worked with machine learning for 20 years or something like that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danijela Horak. I come from BBC, where I lead a team of AI researchers building products and models to help BBC increase efficiency, primarily in the back office. And before that, I was working in financial services and working primarily on time series forecasting.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Kristof Neys. I'm part of the team at Neo4j. So Neo4j is a graph technology platform. And within Neo4j, my responsibility is on the graph data science aspect. So that entails both graph analytics and the machine learning that comes with it. And before that, I also worked in finance.
Well, most of you guys already just heard my introduction in the last talk, but Kjell Carlsson, head of data science strategy and evangelism over at Domino Data Lab, where a lot of my time is spent going in and talking to companies about how they can go in and drive impact at scale about artificial intelligence, as you can guess.
Awesome. Let's hit it off. This one, I think. There we go. All right. Again, we got a set of questions here, some of which are very interesting, and those are the ones we'll pick, because last time we didn't have time for all our questions. Let's see if we can make it happen today. I'd like to start off by talking about traditional data science and machine learning versus generative AI, and what difference you think. And I'll just give a bit of context, which is my reflection. Everybody was talking about training before, and now I don't think people are talking about training as much. We have these models that are sort of good at abstract problem solving and that kind of stuff, and defining the problem is more of a focus. And it always should have been, but now maybe it's easier for it to be that. I don't know. What do you think is the difference? What have you noticed the difference between traditional machine learning and generative AI?
So if we look at sort of top-end generative models, especially LLMs, what they are getting really good at is doing things that humans are really good at. But what they're not good at is also things that humans are not good at. Like they can't look through billions of data records and come up with patterns or classifications and things like that. So it's sort of 2 different worlds to me. Both have their place.
Personally, I always think it's helpful just to start with the data. What are the types of data that are particularly good with generative AI that differentiate it? And really, it's unstructured data, but unstructured data that is highly representative of the world that we live in. So text, voice, speech, well, obviously images, video. Really, these are types of data that we've had a really hard time going and analyzing at scale, and certainly had a hard time of generating in a meaningful way. And so when I think about what's new about generative AI is going in and being able to turn that data into something that we can use, that we can, again, not just on the generation side, but also just making it easier to analyze this in a scalable way. But that's also the problem. It's that, well, we haven't been using and collecting that data, so we don't really know what the use cases and the business models to monetize those use cases are, because, again, we didn't really have great methods for analyzing and using this stuff at scale before.
I mean, I remember when Hadoop was a thing, and we said it's very good for handling unstructured data. And a lot of companies gave the impression that, well, you know, we don't have unstructured data. We have everything in tables, and so it's not super useful to us. But the BBC would strike me as a place where it's been the case for a long time, that you've had many different kinds of data and a lot of unstructured data. What are your reflections on that?
Well, exactly. And I think the real power of this era that we're in at the moment, generative AI, is that, we all can do transfer learning. So that's a big thing. We have these models that can solve a wide variety of tasks, and they are nothing we've ever seen before in terms of speech recognition, in terms of language processing, in terms of image recognition, image processing, and so on. But I do agree with Luka that when it comes to, data science, and when it comes to problems that involve tabular modalities of data, tabular data, then this is where basically we have to think twice before starting to use these models. It's impossible.
If I can maybe just add on to that, I also believe that Gen AI and traditional machine learning models are very complementary. So if we look at Gen AI, we have to be a little bit nuanced. And basically, Gen AI can also write code. So I can basically use tools like Code Interpreter, etc., to now basically democratize all of the traditional ML tools to a wider audience in my organization, etc. So I do think that they're very complementary as well.
Well, let's focus on that for a second. We're not always privy to having a team of world-class scientists with us, right? You typically have tiers. You have your junior scientist, maybe you have a data science lead and that kind of thing. What significance, does this place new demands on the team's generative AI, or is it like we just heard here that it's making it easier? Because I know for my own part, I consider myself a fairly good coder, but it's easier for me to remove bugs from code that an LLM has written than to spend all that time writing it from scratch. So it's not even about a complexity thing. It can be a time-saving thing or whatever. What reflections do you have on the new demands placed on teams with respect to old data science?
So our mission at back in the Peltarian days was democratization of AI. Our vision statement was AI everywhere, advancing humankind. I think OpenAI has achieved that, essentially. This is a massive leap. And I think when we're thinking about LLMs, language, fine, but these are general purpose reasoning agents that we can scale essentially infinitely. And that has a massive impact for how we code, how we do data science, and so on. We just take it to the meta level there. And it's very early days. Everybody's still exploring this type of linear chat conversation that you have today. It's probably not the end of all things, but it's going to touch any type of information processing, and this includes data science, this includes coding, will be affected a lot by this and made easier and more democratized.
So I think for me, it's very interesting how we now interact with knowledge. Like, for example, I use ChatGPT daily and Claude as well, just to get quick summaries of scientific papers and ask questions, very targeted ones that I'm interested in. Whereas, previously it took me a couple of hours to go through the paper and kind of find the answer to that one question. So I think the increases in the efficiency are incredible. I think it's a completely new era, and I don't see it as a demand, but more like as an opportunity for all of data scientists out there to help with coding and so on, and then to integrate in the products. Look at what we've done. A couple of years ago, you would go ahead and collect annotated data for the event detection or entity recognition, entity detection. You would have to spend countless hours and days doing that. Nowadays, everything can be done using GPT-4 API. Of course, it's not cheap.
Is the lift here a lift mostly in time, or is it in skills when we talk about democratization? Because you can make it so that people have more time to do things that are important, but you can also do it so that people can do things that they couldn't do before at all. Where do you feel that the lift has been greatest?
Well, we've been moving towards this direction from the beginning of times. We used to program in assembler, right? Then C, Python, and now we're using English. So it's like a natural evolution, and it's always meant to be like that. It's always meant that we as humans should have a natural way to communicate with machines almost. And I think we're almost there.
I'd like to hear your reflection on the complexity of structuring data, because I've been a fan of graphs for a long time just as a way of structuring data. but sometimes it's been difficult even to explain it to stakeholders, why a graph is useful and that kind of thing. Has generative AI simplified that kind of dialogue?
So as we talked about yesterday, so Gen AI is, and to your point here, is that basically it's allowing now, for instance, to pick up entities and relationships within an unstructured format, very tailored. So you can use Gen AI through the prompting, etc., to pick up effectively an ontology, to construct an ontology. So yes is the answer. You can be very specific, and it will then ultimately extract that graph. And once you have it in a graph, well, the visualization alone, well, obviously explains your data. So it's the power of a graph is the visualization, and now through the tools of a Gen AI, you can very quickly, and some would argue it's an ETL tool on steroids, convert unstructured into a structured format, and once it's in a graph, it's very intuitive.
Well, let me follow up, and this goes great into the next question, which is identifying and prioritizing areas for Gen AI. I think people have had a hard time. Maybe it's a lack of creativity, or maybe it's that the data was never there, or all this unstructured data that we would like to structure like that. Where did it come from? Has it always been there, but we haven't had a way to access it, or are we producing more unstructured data? What's your take on that?
So, to my mind, 80-90% of all the unstructured data is stranded data. It's always been there, right? So these are customer complaints. These
We haven't even considered it.
We haven't even considered it, exactly. And that is now the wealth, that's the opportunity that Gen AI can offer you, basically in a very efficient way to do something with that data, to have that stranded, or you can argue lonely data, right? To do something with it and now make it insightful. And so that, I think that's very promising and very exciting.
I think there is a tie to your earlier question, though, about the demands that it's placed on data science teams. And part of this is that it now, obviously, there are ways in which generative AI makes life harder for you as a data scientist in terms of the DevOps work that you need to do is way harder than what you were tackling previously. But there is this element, going back to when you were talking about either what you call it product owners or product managers before, where you're now even more in this position of needing to be in that role of helping the business try and understand what the use case really is. And we've reluctantly gone into that as data scientists. We found it necessary to go in and help folks understand what the use cases of these technologies are. But now it's even more important because everybody is looking to you and expecting you to be a complete expert on this technology, which you were never trained on before and usually didn't have a whole lot of experience with up to this point. So I think that product manager role and capability is all the more important here because we're not actually that clear on what the use cases are. And when you then throw in the fact that every other parts of the business is also trying to start up their own generative AI projects, you're now in this position of trying to provide guidance and deal with the fact that a lot of attention is being pulled away into other projects which don't really have the knowledge and guidance that they need.
I think certain types of data that are being created are, exactly to your point, if you're trying to explain to a business unit that they want to do something to manage risk, and you have to teach them the scientific method and say, okay, well, how do we measure the risk so that we can have that as an output? And then you have that as data, which the LLM can act on. You've created the data, you have to educate them, and there's a whole slew of steps that are added to this process. How do you think we should identify these low-hanging fruits so that you don't have to do all 5 things at the same time? Teach them the scientific method, start collecting new types of data. What are the low-hanging fruits? What are the best ways for prioritizing a way to introduce these techniques?
That's a very good question. The approach that we've taken at King is essentially we have 2 separate directions. One is how do we make our games better? How do we make our products better? And the other one is how do we increase our productivity? And in the sort of initial split, how do we make our games get better? That's traditional machine learning. That's reinforcement learning, things like that. While in the productivity bit, that's where we're going full LLM, GPT-4, and so on. That's the initial state. What we also have now is an exploration on sort of how can we transition the LLM stuff more to the game applications, and that our AI Labs team is looking at that. But I don't have a clear answer of how, and we've made on purpose this distinction because it's when you have 250 million players, it gets very expensive very quickly if you're going to use like GPT-4 for every single interaction.
Well, I guess I was mentioned previously how I was just done some research on this, and what I found very helpful was to take a jobs to be done approach to this and think about, well, what are the jobs that a generative AI, that a large language model is good at helping you with? And I think the very first one is the first draft generator, whether that be a first draft of the code, of an image, of a written text. It is very good at getting you that initial first one that a human can then take further on. And I guess the second big one was on an information summarizer and retriever. So those two jobs are ones which it's really been very difficult for us to go after with traditional methods. And here, all of a sudden, it has these incredible abilities and seemingly out of overnight or out of nowhere.
Just to pick up on what you mentioned as well, one of the key aspects that Gen AI can do, if you sort of like use it a little bit or fine-tune it a little bit more, is process automation. I believe that's something that you said, like, part of the application. And I think in terms of in the theme of the conference, generating value, process automation is definitely one of the things that is there for Gen AI, I think.
There is a power in processes. Not only are they self-correcting, I mean, not even doctors are, infallible. That's why we have a medical system. That's why we call it the scientific method and not the scientist or something. I'm wondering, like at the BBC, for example, you guys are, well, I don't know exactly how you're all organized, but that's why I'm going to say that you're an island, but you're specialists in your group. And I'm wondering, how do you make sure that, because it's very tempting for us as data scientists to say, well, this thing is very good at classifying images, if we're continuing here, like, what are LLMs good for? Well, then we should work on this. How do you make sure that the things you're working on are actually the things that BBC Studios or something else would say has the highest impact, so that you're making sure that the thing pays for itself?
Well, that's $1 million question, right? And I think nowadays it's especially dangerous to focus on the low-hanging fruit. So I'll just give you an example, like where we got burned this year. So back in January this year, we jumped on the first low-hanging fruit, which was like a RAG-based model on top of our documents. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, we have a conversation with Microsoft, and they are offering us an enterprise deal with, Copilot, Microsoft Copilot plugged in. So then what do you do in that situation? It's a very dangerous one. So I think you have to go back to think from the first principles. It's like, what are the models that are going to have to be retrained and updated frequently? What constitutes core capability to your business? And there's no other way, really, to think about it. Even that is a risk when it comes to
Are you talking about, like, technical
adoption.
debt? Or what do you...
Well, I think, like, for example, recommender systems, it's obvious that you have to retrain them all the time and that you will have to kind of adapt to new data. Same with the anomaly detection algorithms. Like, I would not imagine why someone would think they could just buy a static model of a specific architecture and then have it forever. And then also same when it comes to the language models, like you have to identify where do you think you will have to adapt, where do you think you will have to learn from the data and so on, and pursue that use case.
I'm very curious about this because I'm going to push back on this. I'll play the devil's advocate here. Are we in agreement here that technical debt is a serious problem, and so that we have to consider not accelerating too much to make sure we don't end up there? What is the sense here in the panel?
I won't say technical debt per se, but as it's moving, the field is moving very quickly, and from the enterprise position, when you make a decision, it's a fairly large decision, and then you have to change it in 3 months because something new has come, and it can make a massive impact. So finding the point that, like, okay, now it makes sense, and we can invest in this, keep this for a year or two without losing out on too much. That's hard now.
I fully agree with you. And so that's basically the analogy I always make, is that some companies and some teams want to drive a Ferrari, and that's great, but a Ferrari costs money, right? And sometimes you are better off with a Volvo in Sweden, right? So, and then it depends on what kind of infrastructure that you want to allocate to that, and what kind of structure, data structure, etc. So I think technical debt, to your point, yes, absolutely, is a very important one. And then you want to make, in terms of the context of low-hanging fruit, you want to see what the cost-benefit analysis are on that one, because from certain models and what we talked about earlier, fine-tuning, etc., well, they cost GPUs. And so the question is as well, if you want to go down that route, will there be enough GPUs if everyone does that, right? So those are the trade-offs that you need to. Yeah.
Well, I feel like the technical debt is actually the indirect. What's the direct is the technical constraints. The technical constraints are so much larger right now that then that has then any technical debt that you have then follows into it. But I think part of the problem right now is that the financial incentives are so warped. Right? The only reason why we're able to go in and consume these ultra-large language models via API is because folks like Microsoft and Google are going in and subsidizing that. Exactly. And there's this question of, well, how long is that going to continue for? How much money are they burning through? And what's going to happen when that changes and when they decided that they are not willing to go in and do that anymore?
Well, I'll offer a contrasting perspective, and I'd like to hear if you recognize it. Most data science units don't have a P&L or profit and loss. They're just cost centers. They're viewed as a part of IT. And an AI initiative, if you see it as something where the output is supposed to provide value to the company, either in increased efficiency within the company or perhaps as a value add towards the customer, that calculation is a business decision. And the opportunity cost is seldom talked about. So let's say you have to allocate 3 full-time employees because there's so much technical debt for an entire year. If you merely increase the efficiency of 1 worker 4x, you've paid for 3 full-time employees to fix that technical debt. I just don't see where all these technical hurdles are a problem ever, unless you haven't done the value add and opportunity cost benefit, because it's an integral, right? You have to think of all the money you're losing when you haven't implemented the stuff. Well, because you're waiting to make like the perfect architecture, or you don't want to retrain the model, or you want to make the right decision. And I think vendor lock-in is a real thing because that can prevent you from moving forward. But out of fear of doing the wrong decision, is there some kind of paralysis in a lot of organizations? Is that something you experience? Is that something that IT people only do, or is that a legitimate concern?
So with larger enterprises, you always have a layer of processes, legal, security, IT, and so on, that's been in place for long, and that doesn't really move in this type of speed that we're seeing. So that, of course, slows it down. Then of course, the idea of, okay, let's just supercharge, let's empower these data scientists by these amazing tools, and we'll get out more productivity, also assumes a sort of perfect transfer of knowledge and application from the people. But these are real people who have other stuff, sort of what they consider to be their day job to do. So there is a cultural and transformation that needs to be done that just can't happen overnight. As for relating to value, I would say one of the most successful things that have been worked with machine learning at King was that after the acquisition, the AI/ML team was set up as an independent unit or top level. And we essentially got them P&L. We got a task of, you have to make this much money in this much time. Do it the way you want it. And that led to a prioritization process of prioritizing use cases and sort of execution of them. That has worked really well by connecting the financial value of the different use cases to...
How big was this team?
25 people, something like that. Speltarium was split in two, and sort of one went to build the ML platform, another this AI/ML team, and then augmented by people that were already at King.
Do you think that that's feasible in a bank or in other places that has a data science team of 5 to 20 people, or do you need to be a certain kind of company to do that?
That's a good question. I think what enabled this was that the King leadership, like 2 years ago, decided we were going all in on AI, which led to the acquisition, which led to all of that. So
there's an unspoken question I had while you were talking, which is if this has to be a top-down culture change or a bottom-up culture change. But, well, maybe it could be both, but if you said in King's case at least, it came top-down.
It came top-down, but what we've been really, really fortunate with is this current AI boom, because it's put machine learning and AI on the map for everyone. So everybody's excited about it, and there's top-down in the initiative came top-down.
But I think part of your question, though, is the direct connection to the business. So I remember talking to Wayfair a bunch of years ago, and they had a data science team, which was sort of data science team manager, CEO. And the reason for that was because anything that they did in terms of to improve conversion on the website by just a tiny fraction had a very direct line to the bottom line of the organization. And so there's certain companies where, I mean, it's just so integral to the business, and the data science can affect the core outcomes of the business, that you're in this great position of being able to get great visibility with senior leadership and have great impact. And not everybody's in that. So if I remember talking to a agricultural cranberry collective, and it was sort of like, okay, well, so how's the AI team going to go and move the needle for this cranberry company? It's much less direct. So if you're in one of those businesses, because I would imagine online betting and gaming is one of those where it is directly connected. If you can hit the right things, then you can affect that in a way that sometimes not all data science teams have the luxury of being able to do.
I'd like to hear your perspective, because we spoke yesterday that the BBC is both a private and a public company, and so knowing that you're doing what you're supposed to do is maybe, I don't want to say less clear than in a gaming company, but how do you guys sort of justify costs, success, and all those criteria?
Well, that's a good question. So the part of the BBC I work in is a public service company. So we have a fixed budget yearly, and this budget is allocated to different teams. And I think we have this almost a contract with the British Queen, formerly, now King, in which it says BBC should do research and development, and therefore we're there according to that contract, and at least in the next 7 years. So we basically try to find good questions and prove that we are bringing value. So be it unlocking the archive, where the value is really obvious, that people who are searching for a piece of content can just go and find it. But it's more difficult to basically argue value for the recommender systems, I think, much more, because it's closely tied to the content that is shown, as well as the user interface and whatnot, especially at the BBC, like on the iPlayer, for example, which is a long-form content. And it's really unclear how much of it is due to recommender, how much of it is due to content. And then when people need to kind of make an extra investment, what are they going to invest in? Is it the better algorithm, or is it the better content creation, like commissioning better content? So it's a push and pull. But I would say recommenders usually are more valuable for shorter form content, like Twitter. It's a bread and butter, or Spotify or whatnot. But even Spotify, let's say, for example, I know that many BBC radio editors have ended up taking jobs at Spotify because they found out that actually people like these kind of curated playlists that are created by humans. So, it's debatable, even for the recommenders.
That this ends up being really what is your business model, and where do you want to place your risk in terms of what you think is, the right way to move the company? Which ties back to what you said, that ultimately it's the people at the top that are saying, this is the kind of company we are, we're going to take a risk, let's head in this direction. My sense is that it has to come from above.
If I can maybe just pick up on that point, which is quite relevant locally. So if you look at Klarna, where CEO and their whole management team has been very vocal about, we're going to use AI to drive our business, right? We're going to be a bank now. Where we are a bank, we're going to drive the bank around AI. And then there's another bank in Europe, very large bank, that has basically come up with a general ban on any Gen AI within the bank. So to your point, it very much comes up from higher management. And if you think about it, at the end of the day, every enterprise is a risky business, right? So you need to make a right assessment of what the risks and the potential costs are of those risks, right? So if you go and do an all-right ban on Gen AI, you're not doing a correct risk assessment, to my mind.
Simplifying your job, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You don't take responsibility to your stakeholders at the end of the day, right?
I feel like there is a switch when it comes to the leadership discussion. Previously, we always thought that it was important to have a strong executive sponsor. But these days, I'm seeing folks put in place very, very senior leaders, folks like in a CDAO role, who actually have a connection to data science. And that feels like it's different. There's now both an expectation and an opportunity, because you have folks who have direct experience and can meaningfully participate in these projects and provide guidance and go on and bash heads together and know what needs to be done in a way that previously, just above a certain level, these folks had no experience with the kinds of projects that you were doing. So I guess what I'm recommending these days isn't as much get an executive sponsor. It is now going in and either making sure the organization hires somebody who has this background and experience, or if they don't have that person, you as the data science lead are going, or somebody is going to have to go and step up and become that senior leader who can drive this, because at the end of the day, if all they're doing is providing support, that's just not enough.
I think there's always been an element of FOMO in data science, right? You go to a conference and, oh, your Hadoop cluster is only 400 nodes? Mine is. And, but now the difference is that the output is so visceral. You can see the stuff, and the management really understands it. It's not just a product and a size and a cost and stuff. And so that's a super good thing, because it enables experimentation for us that enjoy this kind of stuff. There's a question here that I want to have time for. We have about 10 minutes left. What are all the risks? And I just want to reflect on some of the talks we saw yesterday. We saw a talk on ethics, which was essentially about geometry and calculus, which I thought was awesome. That's how I want my ethics presentations to be. Really pragmatic. What are the risks of generative AI? What are your reflections?
So from a business perspective, right now it's going down, sort of fully betting on it, as many are, including us, is a bit of an act of faith, because there is an intuitive feel that this will massively improve productivity, and but it's super hard to measure. So there is a lot of uncertainty on the sort of order of magnitude of value of the whole thing. If we look from a legal perspective, I mean, it's super messy. There's nothing there really today to provide guidance. Legal team is typically worried about IP. What happens if we generate a lot of code with AI and we don't know the copyright? Who does that belong to? How are our trademarks protected and things like that? There are a lot of these open questions that haven't got an answer, that essentially we as a society need to decide on.
That's a super interesting note to note again. The legal stuff is a big issue. Let's put a pin in that one and save it again. What are your reflections? What are the risks?
Well, for me, I mean, going back to this RAG stuff, the huge risk is like when you have your business ground truth and you have your user, like a stakeholder, and you put a layer in between. So you don't have this direct connection to truth, and hallucinations have been and will be a problem for foreseeable future. So that's the big one. And then when it comes to actually generating content and using it in your kind of audience-facing products, I think legal is a big issue, copyright and whatnot. And also, I've been at an event a couple of weeks ago where one of the AI scientists from a big British energy company has said that they've already implemented GPT-4 in their kind of customer service chatbots. And it turns out that occasionally they recommend their customers to do something that's not possible, or to go to a web page that doesn't exist or whatnot. But he said, well, you know what, we've calculated, how many times does this happen, and we're comfortable with it. Humans make errors as well. So I think it's important to be pragmatic. Of course, we couldn't do it because we're a very publicly scrutinized company and our risk profile is different. But I think it's not going to be same for all companies.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on that. So in a way, the answer is it depends, right? Depends what you want to service and what basically the drawbacks are. I think to your point, I think the explainability, that's a big issue. But sometimes statistically, it's fine if you miss 2 out of 10 or something like that. We very much thanks. But to my mind, explainability is the main problem, as it were, with Gen AI.
When you say explainability, do you mean accountability or the ability to break down the problem?
You can't really trace back how the answer was constructed.
But we don't do that with people. So why do we want that with AI?
You could argue that there is a way of doing it with people, right? Either through training or asking how they came with explainability.
It's not true. The answer they give is proven to be false.
Right.
Yeah, people I mean, if you line people up and say who's the criminal, they'll just make stuff up.
In that setting.
But I do think we accept it now, right? No, well, what you do something, and then when I ask you why did you do it, you do a post hoc reconstruction. It's not the actual reason why you did it originally. And we operate that way, so I think that's acceptable. But we do hold machines to a much higher standard than we hold ourselves. How many of you have scrutinized the teachers that you leave your kids with at school? There's a lot of weirdos out there. I'm just saying, a model can be retrained.
Yeah. I was asking this, I think he was Greg Zuckerman, wrote this book, The Man Who Solved the Market, and where they were algorithmic traders who were passing over the decisions to the models to go in and do their trading strategies. And how do you go in and explain that to one of your customers? You can't. It's a completely black box. But they didn't have to. You go in and you explain your process and you explain your people. And really, when we're talking about explainability, we are massively overloading that term, and we are expecting things from this that really, as you say, we're not expecting from people. And there are all sorts of, when you get more specific about what it is that we have a problem with, do we have a problem with robustness, with reliability, intuitiveness, or transparency? What is the aspect of trust that we're going after? Only then can we actually make headway against it, and very frequently discover that the explainability was nice, but I don't need explainability from my microwave. I need it to be reliable. I only need explainability if occasionally my food doesn't come out warm.
But your microwave is explainable, and so is the plane, which kind of has much higher capabilities and much higher risk profile than...
You can make the argument that the model is as well, that there is no such thing as a completely black box model. But it's a philosophical discussion.
I think the problem is in the failure modes of these models, like they fail in a completely unhuman-like ways in which you cannot predict.
No, some of them seem very human in terms of like the hallucinations. I feel like I do on a regular basis.
The first misclassification I remember because I thought it was so charming. It was on ImageNet, and the model had classified a scuba diver that had taken a picture of a shark from below against a blue background of a shark and classified it as an airplane. And I was like, of course it's an airplane. I can totally see that. It has the two little wings and everything. Some failure modes are catastrophic, and then there's something wrong. And I think in those cases, sometimes they're probably very difficult, but in many cases, at the very least, I think we can quantify those bounds. Do we have an insurmountable problem here? We have time for one sort of round of reflections on the risks again.
Yes, but on that risk, so I would say the biggest risk of everything here is that it's democratized the ability for everybody to create Microsoft Tay, if you remember that. So the ability to go out and create a chatbot that's going to do something terrible that somebody can post on social media. Right? Now, any part of your business can go in and do this, and many parts of your business are exactly tempted to go after that use case. Now, is that a problem with the technology? No, that's a problem with ourselves for using the technology in a bad way or in a risky fashion. And so I think the problem with this is that because we see these human-like tendencies, we automatically go and think that we can leverage these technologies in ways that we would normally be using people for. And really, I think as you were saying before, this is a technology which is far more safer and more reliable to use as an augmentative technology versus a replacement technology.
Biggest risk to society from Gen AI tech? What's your take on it?
Complete extinction.
Right?
I would agree with Luka.
My microwave not working.
Okay, so no extinction from your side?
I don't believe in that.
What do you say?
I'd say just misuse of it, that we all end up with another AI, an individual company AI winter, because we leveraged it for use cases that it's just not good at, and it doesn't go anywhere. So I think
Can I just
same
add
as
one
you.
more thing? I think the way how we approach this risk or AI safety issue is completely like politicized. And we as scientists should know better. We should not ignore the risks that are here. We all can see them, but we should also not go into a different extreme, but just acknowledge that there are risks and they are potentially dangerous. Even though the probability might be very, very, very tiny, value at risk is huge if someone is from financial world here. Value at risk.
I wanted to end with a reflection. I read a book I don't remember which one it was, if what are you thinking, Mr. Feynman or whatever. Richard Feynman's big regret in life was working on the Manhattan Project. But the way they were compartmentalized there was that they didn't really know what they were working on. They knew there was high energy physics. I mean, that's what their specialization was. But you know, he talked about how when they got their first computer, the first thing they did was start playing games on it. It was like drawing equations, and they were like, let's see how wavy we can get it. And it was only too late until they realized what it was they were actually working on. In this case, I think a lot of scientists know what they're working on, but I'm not sure it would make a difference. I do agree, though, with one of the speakers here that said that, you also mentioned that you think that people have a sense of ethics without having to have a committee. What is the final word here on where the responsibility falls?
And that's a fantastic question. I would, with practical experience from a lot of companies and a lot of data scientists, I would respectfully disagree that people have a sort of idea of what's ethical and what's not, especially if it's, and even what's legal and what's not. If you look at sort of GDPR rules and things like that, there's a blissful unawareness all around us. And a sort of don't ask, don't tell type of thinking. But who's accountable? I think that's an open question. I don't have the answer.
I think that's what people care about. They care about who to blame, not necessarily how to achieve a good result.
I think with the current sort of generation of top-end model is the one who prompts it.
Excellent. Well, I was hoping to do one last round. If you have a comment,
my take on it would be, it's the flip side of, you know, the whole with great power comes great responsibility. I would say it's the other way around. You can't be responsible if you don't have the power to do something about it. And right now, the problem is that most of the people who understand the problem don't have the power. So I think this room, the folks who are here, need a lot more power to be able to take those actions to ensure that it's able to be done responsibly.
Right. Last show of hands. Who here welcomes our robot overlords? Audience? I saw only like a couple. Okay, nice to see. All right, in the minority, we'll be growing. Thank you for listening to this panel. Thank all the panelists today, and we'll be back in about 5 minutes. Cheers. We have a break now, right?